So, like Crystal said, I'm Steve, and I'm the campus pastor here at our Longmont campus. I'm really glad to be back here. My wife and I, we went on a little trip for our anniversary, which was absolutely awesome. We did almost die on kayaks, so that was cool. We went out when it was like 65 degrees and sunny, and then we got caught in the middle of a hailstorm, and some dude in a pontoon boat had to rescue us. And then when we got back to shore, he showed us a picture of like a sailboat with its sail torn off, and he was like, "This is what happened to a sailboat in the same kind of waves last year." And we're like, "Thank you." What are you talking about? So we're alive, and that's exciting. So I don't know what I'm more terrified of, dying in a kayak or teaching during the women's series, but it's a close one too, okay? And I know Jim's kind of joked about that. I am not joking, okay? And let me explain to you like exactly how qualified I feel to teach during the series. So when I was in high school, one day I was, walking along the halls of the school, and one of my friends actually walked around the corner. She almost walked into me, and she had like tears running down her face. Her eyes were like red and puffy, and she, sniffling. And what I immediately reacted and said was, "Man, bad allergies, huh?" And then one of our other friends who was with her was like, "Her dog just died. What's wrong with you?" and I don't know. Is the answer. I still don't. And then I grew up and matured, got to know people a little better, and then I got a job, and one of my female coworkers, not here at Flatiron, somewhere else, she and I were talking about how things were going, and I thought she wanted really direct and honest feedback, and didn't like tact apparently, because what I said is, "Hey, honestly, I think you kind of come across arrogant, and I really don't think you care about people." And then she got real bad allergies. I don't know, it's weird. Or there was a time when my wife and I, we were dating, and it was my birthday, and so she's like, "Hey, come meet me at the park. I want to celebrate you." And I was thinking, we'll just go hang at the park. That's cool, whatever. I show up, and she has like a picnic blanket spread out with like a steak dinner and like a homemade cake and a home-brewed beer that we brewed together, and like a handmade birthday sign that says, "Happy Birthday." And I'm sure what she wanted me to say in that moment was something along the lines of, "Darling," she's right down here, "Darling, I love you so much. You are the woman of my dreams. I have never felt so cared for." Which I didn't. What I said was something more along the lines of, "Oh my gosh, can we just eat?" So that date went well. Now what she didn't know is that I'm not really a big fan of people making a huge deal of my birthday, and honestly the steak was kind of getting cold, and the cake was, I'd always go for ice cream over cake, and like the beer that we brewed, I didn't really love the beer, and I was just thinking like, man, I do not want to do dishes. And so here's what I know. I know there's a bunch of women in this room looking at me like, what is wrong with you? I still don't know, and also, my wife is a saint. I don't know why she puts up with me. I married her for that reason, and also for her looks, brains, and money. So, that's it. She married me anyways, it's fine. So I tell all those stories because I want to echo what Ben said last week. Honestly, I do not feel qualified to give my opinion during a women's series. So rather than give my opinion, what I want to do is I want to actually look at one of Jesus' most famous interactions with a woman in the Bible and see how he treated her, how he acted, and see what we can learn from it. So this is a story in John 4, and normally people call it the woman at the well because Jesus goes and he meets a woman at a well, right? So Jesus goes, he's traveling around Israel, to give you a little background, and he's teaching. So this is right at the beginning of his ministry. And he goes to this area called Samaria. And Samaria is kind of near Jerusalem, but this is a weird thing for him to go through Samaria because the truth is, real strict Jews would avoid Samaria almost at all costs, right? They would go days out of their way to avoid it because they didn't want to come in contact with the Samaritans, the people who lived in Samaria. And the reason was that the Samaritans, they were Jewish by heritage, so if you went way, way back, they were descended from the same people that, the rest of the Jews in Israel were, but they had married with other ethnic groups and blended with them. And so there's this weird racial tension in the story, but the even bigger deal, at least for the Jews, was that the Samaritans had taken on some of the gods of the people that they'd blended with. And so they kind of had idols that they worshipped. And when we think of idol worship, we think of a little, wooden statue, and people are like, "Oh, idol, whatever." And that's fair. But I want to actually broaden that definition out today a little bit, okay? So when I talk about an idol, And when you think about an idol, here's what I want you to think of. An idol is anything that you hope will take care of you if you sacrifice to it. Right? Anything other than God that you hope will take care of you if you sacrifice to it. And so the Samaritans, they had idols. And they also kind of kept like Judaism on the side, like a slightly different version of Judaism. Like it was a few different things, but they were kind of like, okay, we totally believe in God and follow him, but also we got these idols on the side, a little side hustle. So that's what Jesus is walking through. So he's, walking through Samaria, and he comes to a well, and this is what happens. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. Okay, now quick pause. Jacob is one of the patriarchs of Judaism, okay? So he's like one of the guys who founded all of it. In fact, later on in his life, his name got changed from Jacob to Israel by God. So God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. He's the guy the country is named for. So in terms of wells, like this well is a big deal, right? So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to have water. Okay, so this is a weird thing. So Jesus is like sitting by this well, right? And a woman walks up, and it's around the 6th hour, which is noon. Now, people in this culture would not have gone to the well at noon because it's not quite a desert, but this is an arid climate. It's hot. So people would normally go in the mornings when it was cool. And they would normally go in a big group. It was kind of like almost a community event. And so this woman is coming in the middle of the day when it's hottest, and she's all by herself. And so you got to ask, like, why would she do that? And the answers are either she ran out of water at a really bad time, or she's trying to avoid people. But today she doesn't manage to because she walks up and Jesus is sitting there. And whether it's because of what he's wearing or whether it's the way he talks or whatever, she knows he's Jewish almost right away. And so here's how the interaction starts. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples, all of his followers, the people who were with him, his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealing with Samaritans." So people are torn on whether this woman is like real hostile and sarcastic or whether she's like really sincere and just trying to figure things out. I have a real smart mouth. So when I read this, I read it all sarcastic. So honestly, I think she starts out taking shots. Because that phrase there, have no dealings with the Jews and the Samaritans, that phrase might have actually indicated that Jews wouldn't even drink from the same cup as a Samaritan. Right? They look down on him, they're like, no, I won't drink from that. And so this woman, when I read it, here's what I read. Hey, bro, really nice that you're asking me to get you a drink, but here's the deal, arrogant religious guy. You won't even drink from the same cup as me, probably. So I only have the one bucket, and I'm not giving it up. How are you going to get water from me? And if I'm right, if she's taking shots, here's what I think. I think she's probably been hurt by religious people who said, yeah, I love God, and then treated her like dirt. But Jesus isn't there to take advantage of her, right? He's not there to treat her like dirt. And so he says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. So he kind of plays the same game. He's like talking about the kind of this religious tension, like, hey, if you knew the gift of God, if anyone had actually showed you what God is like and what he thinks about you, which they haven't, by the way, then you'd know that I probably have something to offer. And then he says this weird thing, like, hey, I would give you living water. And Jesus here is he's not talking about like liquid, right? He's talking about a with God kind of life, like, hey, I can help you connect to God. But some people think that living water was actually a phrase that meant a stream, and so this woman misunderstands him because she's like looking around and she's like, this is a desert, bro. Where are you going to get living water? Where are you going to get a stream? And so she actually kind of shoots back a little bit. She says, sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Bro, we're in a desert, and you didn't bring a bucket. I did. What do you think you have to offer me? And then she does something that, this is what I think the story turns on. She says, are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. Now remember, Jacob is the guy who founded Judaism, right? Or he was one of the founders. He's the guy whose name got changed to Israel. So she's looking at Jesus and she's like, hey, Jewish teacher, do you think that you're better than Jacob? Do you think you're greater than him? Because he started this whole deal. The country is named for him, and he dug the well because there aren't any streams around here. So we're coming back here over and over again because there's nowhere else to get water. And this is really subtle but really important. See, when she does that, she links that well with all of the things she knows about Judaism, all the things she knows about God, all the religious practices and arrogance that she knows. She's saying like, hey, this well, that's what this is linked to. She may not be thinking it in her head, but Jesus plays off of it. So he says, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I give will never be thirsty again. The water that I give him will become a spring of water welling up to eternal life. And so Jesus is kind of like, okay, so you talking about this well as Jacob's well. And here's the thing. She asked him, like, are you greater than Jacob? He could have answered yes, and it would have been a really awkward ending to the story. Instead, he says, hey, I know you think this is the only place to get water, but and again, she's linked this to Judaism, if you think all the old religious rules and regulations and arrogance that you've seen, if you think that's the only thing that's true about God, then you will keep coming back to this well and you will end up thirsty. It's not going to satisfy you. But I can give you water and make it so you're never thirsty again, which that's a crazy statement. Right? And so that's so crazy that this woman immediately fires back. She's like, sir, give me this living water that I may never be thirsty again. And when I read this, I'm like, she's being sarcastic, right? But again, I have a smart mouth, so I was like, I'm going to go to people who are smarter than I am, and I'm going to go read some theologians who I really like and respect. And I read it, and I really loved how they put it. They said, she's being sarcastic. She is. She's like, oh, yes, please give me this magic water so that I don't have to come back here and bump into jerks like you in the middle of the day. That would be great. And Jesus has this really weird response. He says, go call your husband and come here. And the woman answered him, I have no husband. And Jesus said to her, you are right in saying I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true. And right there is where we figure out why this woman is coming to the well in the middle of the day. We figure out why she's being sarcastic and why she's almost like deflecting anything Jesus says, why she's avoiding any real connection. It's because life's been hard. Life's been hard on her. She's been through 5 marriages, and here's the thing. This is where this story gets lost in translation a lot of times. Because almost everywhere you hear this taught, people will call her the immoral woman, right? And the implication is like, oh, you've been through a few guys, huh? Hussy. The assumption is she's just slept her way through 5 marriages, but the story never says that. It says she's had 5 husbands, and now she's living with a guy who's not her husband. And the truth is, it would have been almost impossible for this woman to actually get 5 divorces. It was nearly impossible for a woman to get a divorce at all, let alone 5. And this is just my opinion. I think it would be pretty darn near impossible for her to commit adultery 5 times in this culture and come out alive. So it's much more likely that her husbands either died or that they left her because they wanted to marry another woman. And that would have been fairly common. And there's plenty of reasons why that could have happened, but here's my theory. And again, this is just my theory. We hear about 5 marriages, we don't hear about any kids. So it's possible they're just left out of the story, or it's possible this woman is barren. It's possible she's been struggling with something that a lot of people in this room have struggled with, but instead of walking alongside of her and caring for her and supporting her, the men in her life left. They abandoned her. She's been left 5 times. And here's the thing, people will then point to like, well, yeah, but she's sleeping with this guy. And that's true. The implication in the text is that the man she's living with, who's not her husband, she's sleeping with him. And that is outside of what God wants for her. It is. God says that sex is best reserved for marriage, and she's not following that. But here's the thing, we almost never point out that women in this culture who were single, divorced, or widowed would have had an incredibly difficult time supporting themselves. And this woman's parents either weren't around or didn't want her because the only place she finds to actually meet her needs is stepping in with this man who potentially she's just his concubine. And basically what happened is he looked at her and saw her in her most vulnerable spot, said, hey, I see that you need something. I see that you need a place to stay. I can help you out for a price. We never point out that this guy is probably taking advantage of her, that he has sacrificed her dignity to his own sex drive because he didn't have to sleep with her to help her, right? He could have married her, or he could have just taken her in and said like, hey, come on in, I would love to help you out. But he doesn't, and this isn't the first time she's been sacrificed, right? This isn't the first time she's been sacrificed to someone's needs, because either she's been sacrificed to her own desires, like, hey, you know, this marriage just really isn't working out. I'm just not feeling loved, so maybe if I step outside of this, then I can feel accepted. Maybe if I sleep with him. Or she's been sacrificed to the men in her life saying something along the lines of, you know, I really want a kid and I would feel successful then and my inheritance would be locked up and it'd be great, so I'm going to sacrifice her happiness and well-being for my desire. She's been sacrificed to people's idols, right? Something they thought would take care of them. And so they were willing to give up things they shouldn't have. And you know what you call something that's been sacrificed to an idol? You call it a victim. And that's not me being clever. That's literally the definition. A victim is something that's been sacrificed to an idol. That's where we get the word. And so this woman has been sacrificed to the desires, either her own desires or to the desires of other people who thought that something else would take care of them. And so they're like, whatever, I don't care. And I think there's a lot of people in this room who can relate to that story. Right? Someone did something or something happened and you were sacrificed to someone's idol. You became a victim. And here's the thing, that word victim is like a really charged word in our society. Here's all I mean. Someone chose something they shouldn't have over treating you the way God intended you to be treated. That's a victim. Someone chose something they shouldn't have over treating you the way that God intended. And the message either way is really clear. Here's how valuable you are, and it's less valuable than that. And then we pick up shame, because I think one way of defining shame, it's not the only way, but one way is to say, you think you're not valuable because of your or someone else's choices. And when you pick up shame, you hide. And this is where I've heard a lot of women relate to this story. Right? Something happened and you're like, okay, if I go there, if I do that, if I'm like this, then I'll actually be hurt, and I don't want to be hurt again. And so they come up with a cover. This woman's cover in the story, hers is religion. And it's sarcasm. Yours might look something like, hey, I'm really angry at God, but man, God is so good. Like, oh, amen, this is awesome. But secretly you're pissed. Or it might look something like, man, you know, I have faced rejection over and over again, and so I will do whatever it takes to keep this relationship going. We call that codependence, right? Or maybe it's something along the lines of, oh man, I don't feel like I'm good enough for anyone in my life, but man, I'm driven and I'm successful and I break through glass ceilings and I get stuff done. And here's the thing, none of those are bad. None of those things in and of themselves are bad, but if the drive is just covering up that you don't feel like you're enough anywhere, or if you're skipping meals because all you think is that you have physical appearance to offer, or if the perfect Instagram pictures are covering up that your family's a mess and you don't know what to do about it, then you're just going back to the same well over and over again and hoping that it'll actually satisfy your thirst, but you just end up thirsty again. And then at some point you end up like this woman, alone, isolated, and looking around trying to figure out how not to become a victim again.
I have a father who is an alcoholic, and he struggles to this day. The ripple effect of that was I heard messages growing up that I didn't matter, that he would rather choose to drink than spend time with me. My name is Crystal Yepes. I'm the Kids Ministry Director over at Flatirons Longmont. When I was in second grade, my dad and mom got a divorce, and my mom remarried 2 years later. My stepdad became that father figure that I never had. But that all changed when I was 16 years old. One morning, I got up early before anyone else in the house, and I was getting ready for my volleyball game. I showered and then went into my room and was getting ready, getting dressed in front of my dresser mirror. And then all of a sudden I saw this dark figure peering at me through the window, and my heart started beating out of my chest. All I could think of is I need to hide, I need to run into my closet. I shut the door of my closet, and I'm thinking to myself, I need to get dressed. I need to quickly tell my stepdad that some creep is looking at me through my bedroom window. So I did, and I bolted to my bedroom door and met my stepdad in the hallway, and I told him what happened, and he had this stone cold look on his face. And then he admitted to me that it was him. And all I could think is, why? Why would you do this to me? Because a father is supposed to protect their daughter. So everything changed after that. I lost my voice. I lost my confidence. I even changed my posture. I wanted to hide. I didn't want people to see me. And I kept telling myself that it's not a big deal. He didn't molest me, so it doesn't matter. Why do I feel this way? So that comparison piece just made it worse. The lies kept flooding in. I don't matter. All that matters is your looks. I became exhausted with wanting to be perfect all the time, put together, strong, put on a mask, because I felt that was the best way to deal with the anger that I suppressed for so long. After becoming a mom, I decided that, man, I can control their lives. I can control what's happening to people close to me. Through my control, then no one can hurt me. I just want to be perfect all the time because that feels safe, and I know that I'm working towards something. I'm afraid to speak up because if I say something that's not intelligent or maybe it wasn't relevant at the time, if I hear that, then it makes me feel that I don't have a voice and that I don't have anything to offer. So I shut down and I don't speak up. So the ones closest to me felt my brokenness, my anger, my sadness. And for the past 4 years, I've been on staff here at Flatirons, and I've been living with this tension of obediently accepting the call of what God's asked me to do here at Flatirons, but then also still have that tension of I'm still upset at God for not protecting me, for not showing up. And so through this series, and just recently also with therapy, I've decided to work on this anger. And I think the hardest part is inviting God into my mess because I've been hiding from him for so long. And trying to be honest and tell him, hey, I'm angry at you. Why did you let this happen to me? But I think that as I am taking those steps forward to trust God, I'm seeing that he is listening to me, that there is hope, that there is healing, and that through my brokenness, he could use that for good to help other people. I'm hearing that it's okay to not be okay. And he's listening to me. And through this women's series, I'm hearing messages of who he created me to be. Because I don't know what it feels like to be the daughter of someone that's proud of me. I'm slowly learning, and I'm a work in progress because trust takes time. But I'm learning that Jesus says he loves me. Jesus says that I matter to him. Jesus says that I can rest. And Jesus says I can just be me and stop trying so hard.
See, someone may have treated you the way God didn't intend. Someone may have victimized you, sacrificed you to their idol. But here's the thing, that is not what Jesus wants, and it's not where he leaves the story. It's not where it ends. See, the next thing this woman asks is, I almost can't tell if it's sarcastic or if she's like starting to get hopeful, because she kind of makes this weird comment where she's like, well, hey, oh, by the way, you just called out my most vulnerable parts. Wait a minute. So what do you think? Where should we worship? Should we worship in Samaria or in Jerusalem, which is like the biggest controversy between Jews and between Samaritans was like where to worship. So the best way I can think to describe what she's doing there is it would be the equivalent of like walking into an NRA meeting and be like, hey, what do you think of gun control? Right? It's a hot topic. She's basically egging him on. She's like, hey, where should we worship? Listen, I would rather fight with you than actually have connection. I'll do anything to avoid talking about that part of my life. And Jesus basically brushes it aside, and he's like, hey, listen, where you worship is not nearly important as important as who you worship and how you worship. And then she has this one last thing, and this is where I can't tell if she's being sarcastic and distracting or hopeful. I kind of think she's maybe being a little bit hopeful. She says this, I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. So she's referencing this idea that like, hey, I know there's these prophecies about someone who's going to come and save Israel, who's going to take care of us, who's going to actually connect us to God, and I know he's coming, and I think maybe what she's doing here is she's like, hey, I don't know if there's something good that you have to offer me. I don't know if you're the good thing, but if you can point me in that direction at all, I will take it. And I think a lot of us have been in that place, right? Like, I don't know if Jesus has anything good to offer, but if you can give me anything, I will take it. And Jesus knows exactly what she needs, and he says, hey, I who speak to you am he. I'm the Messiah. That's me. I'm the one who's here to save people. And this is where what we know of the conversation ends. Because Jesus' disciples, they come back from town and they like look at Jesus talking to this woman and they're like, what's going on? Because it was real unusual for a man to address a woman in public like this, let alone a Jewish teacher to address a Samaritan. And so basically, the way I would translate what they're thinking is like, Jesus, what are you doing? We don't talk to people like that. She's a woman and she's a Samaritan. And she's here in the middle of the day, which means there's something wrong with her. Like, what are you doing? Why are you treating her like she's valuable? They don't say that, but that's what I'm guessing they think. But this woman doesn't care. She actually like drops her water jug and she sprints back to town and she starts telling everybody like, hey, I just talked to a guy who told me everything I ever did. I think he might be the Christ. I think he might be the Messiah. And people are like, well, okay, I'll go see him. And I don't think that it was like, yes, that sounds logical. You know, my guess is that when people heard her saying this, either they were like, are you crazy and do you need help? Like, we'll go with you. Or they were like, he told you everything you ever did? That's probably a lot. Okay, let's go see it, you know? I think it was almost like a sideshow, and they go and they talk to Jesus, and here's what happens. Many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days, and many more believed because of his word. They said to the woman, it is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world. So Jesus leverages this woman, this isolated woman who's wrapped up in shame and guilt and doesn't know what to do with it. He actually leverages her brokenness to bring a bunch of people into connection with him so they can actually know that God loves them. He leverages her brokenness, not her strengths, not her gifts. Like, this woman is smart, right? He could have sent her out with arguments because I honestly can't think of anyone in the Bible who has a better back and forth with Jesus than this woman. She's smart. But he doesn't leverage that. He leverages, he told me all I've ever done. He knows the deepest parts of my heart, and he still showed me value. I think he might be the Christ. And don't miss this, he actually also leverages that brokenness to bring her back into connection with people. He actually uses it for her good. See, there's that weird line at the end where it's like, people are like, oh, we believe because of what you said at first, but now we believe in Jesus because we've met him. And I always thought that was kind of like a big, middle finger to her. Like them saying like, oh, you said it at first, but now we believe in Jesus. But when I read it this time, I almost saw it like this. Hey, you know what? At first, we just thought that you were talking about something crazy and we kind of believed and thought it would be cool. But now we've met him, and here's the thing. You're right. You're right. He's the Savior of the world. And this woman's brought back into community. And so here's the thing. This woman, I think we need to pay attention to this woman. This woman, her value was under attack, right? She'd been sacrificed to people's idols. She'd become a victim like, hey, here's how valuable you are, and it's not very. But what Jesus does is he reassigns her value. I think that every one of us deals with this question, like, am I enough? I think women, the very specific attack on you in this world is against your value. I think it was the first attack. Jim talked about this story a couple weeks ago where Eve is tempted like, hey, listen, you can be like God if you just do this. In other words, hey, you're not quite enough now. I know you're made in God's image, but you're not quite enough. You need a little bit more, and then you'll be okay. But Jesus doesn't tell this woman to go clean up her life. He doesn't tell her to fix anything. Honestly, this is one of the few times where he doesn't say, go and sin no more. In fact, he just meets her in her brokenness. Here's the thing, women. Jesus is waiting for you in the midst of your most vulnerable places, in the midst of your brokenness, and he's saying like, hey, you are enough right now because I've declared you enough. And what that means is that a couple years after this interaction with this woman, Jesus actually went to the cross, and he took the shame and isolation of that. He took on the sacrifice. He became a sacrifice to some men's power drive. And then he came back to life to show like, hey, actually, you didn't get to sacrifice me. I gave myself up so that I could be connected to you, and I could take your sin, shame, and insecurity, and in the most broken parts of your life, I could leverage it for good. And here's the way that the Bible talks about that. The Apostle Paul is talking about, what do we do with all the suffering in the world? And he says, here's the thing. We know that God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And so he doesn't say, hey, everything's good. He doesn't say that what happened to you is good. He doesn't say like, oh yeah, all the things that happen are good. He says, I will use all of them for good. So in other words, you're not a victim. At least you're not just a victim. You're not just a sacrifice because there's life on the other side of that. In other words, you're a survivor. And if you look around after a little while you're following Jesus, you'll recognize that God is actually leveraging your brokenness to help the people around you, to connect them to him. And so what do we do with this? I think there's a couple things. The first one is, women, if you're here and what you're thinking is like, oh my gosh, great, another thing I have to do. Another thing I have to do is like go get rid of my idol and go to a different well and probably have to like figure out how to be less of a victim or whatever. If that's what you're thinking, then here's your takeaway. Take a breath. You don't have to do anything else to be called worthy. God actually says you're valuable right now. You don't have to do anything else for it. You don't have to do anything else to connect with Jesus. He's actually waiting for you right here. Now, he doesn't want you to come back to the same well over and over again, but he will meet you at that well. Right now where you're at. And if you're someone who's like, hey, honestly, I totally get that grace thing, like I'm on board with that, I actually need a next step, well, then maybe your next step is this. Ask yourself the question, what's your well? What's your idol? What's the thing that you are sacrificing important things to because you hope it'll take care of you? Is it a job? Is it the perfect family? Is it some friendship? Is it a relationship? What are you looking at and saying, man, if that just works out okay, then I think I'll be fine, because you will sacrifice really important things to it, and then eventually you will look around and you'll be alone and you'll still be thirsty. But if you can put that in the right order and recognize that Jesus actually loves you and declares you valuable already and just connect with him, then you'll actually find out that you get to enjoy those things and you become their protector and their provider instead of sacrificing them. You stop making victims and you start raising up children of God, right? That's the story. And eventually you'll look around and realize that God has actually used your most broken parts of your life for good. I don't know what that looks like, honestly, but I know it's true. And men, I cannot leave because it's Father's Day, right? I cannot leave without saying this. There are some people in this room who are struggling with Father's Day because they're like, man, I don't have a great connection with my dad. Things didn't go that well. And let me tell you, that is honestly okay. I think that's just a reality of life. We have a good Father in heaven, but not the rest of us fathers, we're not perfect. But dads, here's what we do have a chance to do. You have a chance to show an incredible amount of value to the women in your life. In fact, men, all of us have that chance to show our wives, our mothers, our daughters, our sisters an incredible amount of value to say like, hey, you're more important than anything that I need. I actually want to take care of you, and you are enough as you are right now. And dads, there is no one that you have a bigger effect on with that than your daughter, I would bet. Right? And this is a really cool thing. When I talk to my daughter and I'm like, hey, you are beautiful, I am so proud of you, she lights up in a way that she lights up very rarely otherwise. Dads, you have a chance to declare that value, and honestly, that's a real joy. That's a really cool thing. So let's go out and change that script. Let's go out and declare value to the women that are around us, to say, hey, you're actually enough as you are right now. And here's the thing, this is where I would normally say like, okay, I'm gonna pray and then we've got one more song, but instead of me praying today, I actually wanted to have Crystal come up here and pray for our campus. Come on up, Crystal.